The hall was grand, larger than anything she had ever seen before. High ceilings arched above, reflecting the golden light of chandeliers that swayed slightly with the movement of air. Velvet curtains hung heavy and red, framing the stage where only the best musicians in the city had performed. Tonight, it would be her turn. She had waited for this moment for years, but the reality of it felt heavier than she imagined. People in expensive suits and glittering dresses filled the room, their chatter echoing off the walls. There were smiles, laughter, and a faint hint of arrogance in the air. She felt small, almost invisible. As she walked down the side of the hall, toward the stage, her hands tightened around the old leather strap of her bag, the one that held her piano sheets and a small notebook of compositions she had written herself. The bag was worn, the edges frayed, but it held all her world. She could feel the eyes of some people on her already, judging her shoes, her coat, the way she carried herself. They whispered and laughed quietly, not caring if she could hear them. She did, of course, and the whispers stung. But she held her head high and kept moving. She took a deep breath when she reached the stage. The piano was massive, shiny, and new, the kind of instrument she had only ever dreamed of touching. Her fingers hovered above the keys, feeling the cool surface and imagining the sound it could make. She closed her eyes for a moment and remembered her childhood piano. It had been broken, missing keys, and sometimes the notes would sound strange or off. But it had been hers, and she had spent countless hours trying to make music on it. Every note she had learned, every song she had composed, had been a fight against silence and limitation. The audience was still talking, still laughing in small groups, unaware or unconcerned about the nervous energy building on the stage. One man in the front row leaned over and whispered something to a woman next to him. She caught only part of it, but it was enough to make her heart tighten. What is she even doing here? She forced herself to push down the sudden spike of fear. She had rehearsed for years, practiced in basements, in empty classrooms, even on broken pianos in the hallways of her school. She knew her music. She knew she belonged. The doubt was theirs, not hers. She opened her eyes and looked at the audience again. They were an intimidating sea of faces, many of them expecting a mistake. Some were nodding politely, others were smirking. It would have been easy to turn around, walk out, and hide. But she could not. All those years of struggle, all those hours of lonely practice, had led to this one moment. She had to face them, even if it meant facing mockery. The stage felt cold under her fingers, but she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, like testing the water before diving in. A few people in the audience tilted their heads, a little surprised that the music was real, that someone so small could make a sound so full. But many still whispered and laughed quietly, expecting it to go wrong. She ignored them, letting the music guide her. It started to flow, building slowly. She remembered her childhood again, the times she had practiced in silence when everyone else was asleep. Every mistake she had made had taught her something new. Every note she had struggled to hit now made her stronger. Her body relaxed into the rhythm. The hall seemed to fade away, leaving only the piano, her hands, and the music. She could feel the emotion in the keys, the way each note could reach someone without words. She played a melody she had written herself, one that spoke of hope and pain, of loneliness and courage. It was personal, raw, and it demanded attention. Slowly she noticed the murmurs of the audience quieting. The laughter stopped. People were leaning forward, listening, some with eyes widening in surprise. She did not look at them. She did not need to. The music was speaking for her. Every note carried a story. Every pause was meaningful. She remembered the nights she had spent with her old piano, practicing while the wind rattled the windows and the rain poured outside. That piano had been broken, but it had been her teacher. It had taught her patience, resilience, and the power of sound. She poured all of that into this moment, letting her fingers move as if they had a mind of their own. There was a man near the back of the hall, who had been one of the first to mock her. He had leaned back in his chair, smirking, thinking this would be easy entertainment. But his smirk faded slowly, replaced by disbelief and then respect. He did not speak, could not speak, as the melody wrapped around him like a gentle wave, carrying him into a world he had not expected. She saw similar reactions all around. Eyes glistened with emotion. Some people swallowed hard, others leaned forward, hanging on every sound. She remembered her mother, who had encouraged her to keep playing even when life had been difficult. She remembered the first time someone had told her she could not do it, that she did not have the right training or background. Every negative word, every doubt, every whisper of mockery now fueled her. It was strange, the way pain and joy could exist together, the way music could turn fear into strength. She felt a surge of confidence, a feeling she had never known before. The music was no longer just sound. It was a shield, a statement, a declaration that she was here, she mattered, and she would be heard. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours, and the hall had transformed. The air, once filled with snickers and doubt, was now thick with attention and awe. People were no longer talking among themselves. They were connected through the story she told on the piano. Some had tears running down their cheeks. Others simply sat in silence, unable to move or speak. She noticed a young girl in the front row, gripping her mother's hand tightly, eyes wide with wonder. She felt a pang of happiness, realizing that maybe, just maybe, she had inspired someone tonight. The final notes came softly, lingering in the air. She held the last note just a little longer than necessary, letting it fade naturally like a sigh of relief. For a moment, there was complete silence. The room seemed to hold its breath. She opened her eyes and looked up, seeing faces that had once mocked her now reflecting surprise and respect. Some were whispering, but their tone had changed. There was no more laughter, no more disbelief. There was only acknowledgement of something genuine and extraordinary. She stood there for a second, letting the moment sink in. Her hands were slightly trembling, her heart pounding, but she felt alive in a way she never had before. The journey that had started in a small broken room with an old piano had led to this moment of triumph. It was not just about the applause which was coming now, slowly building, but about the realization that she had conquered something deeper. She had faced mockery, doubt, and fear, and had transformed it into beauty. As the applause grew louder, she allowed herself a small smile. She did not need to look at anyone in particular. The music had spoken for her. She had turned a hall full of skeptics into an audience of believers, if only for a moment. That was enough. It was a beginning, a promise that her journey was not over. She would continue to play, to compose, to tell her story through the keys of the piano. The memory of laughter and doubt would no longer haunt her, it would remind her of how far she had come. She took a deep breath, letting the energy of the room fill her. For the first time, she felt the weight of possibility. Her journey had been long and lonely, but it had led her to a place where her talent could shine, where her story could be heard, and where her music could touch hearts. The moment was hers, and she embraced it fully, knowing that this was only the first step in a much larger adventure. She had turned mockery into music, doubt into beauty, and a simple piano performance into a legend in the making. Long before the grand hall, long before the audience and the whispers, she had lived in a small, narrow apartment with walls that were too thin and windows that rattled when the wind blew. The apartment was quiet in some ways, but it was filled with the sounds of life: her mother cooking in the kitchen, her father's shoes tapping on the floor, neighbors talking in the hall, and the occasional scolding of children running outside. It was never empty, and yet she had felt lonely. Music became her escape, her way of creating a world that was hers alone. Her first piano had been old, battered, and missing a few keys. It had been a hand-me-down from a distant relative who had not cared much for it. When she first sat down in front of it, she did not know if she could make it sing. The keys were stiff and uneven, some notes flat, some sharp. But the moment her fingers touched them, she felt a spark. She pressed down slowly, one key at a time, and a sound came out. It was not perfect, not beautiful by anyone else's measure, but it was hers, and it made her heart beat faster. Her mother had been busy most of the time, working long hours to keep food on the table. Her father had left when she was very young, and she rarely thought about him. Still, she was never completely alone, because the piano had become her friend, her teacher, and her companion. Every evening, after the apartment had settled into its own quiet rhythm, she would sit on the small stool and practice. She practiced simple scales at first, the sounds uneven but full of effort. Then she began trying songs she heard on the radio or on old recordings she had borrowed from the library. The first time she tried to play a song all the way through, she had made a dozen mistakes, each note clanging like a warning. She had almost given up, frustrated by her own hands and by the piano that seemed to fight her every step. But she remembered a phrase her mother had once said, "Keep trying, even when it is hard. You will see the difference if you do not stop." She did not fully understand it then, but she clung to it. She pressed her fingers onto the keys again and again, learning to listen to the mistakes, to correct them, and to find the sound she wanted to create. Slowly, slowly, the notes began to flow, imperfect but growing stronger. She learned by listening. She listened to everything around her, the way rain drummed on the roof, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the laughter of children playing outside. She copied the rhythms, the pauses, the highs and lows. Music became not just something she played, but something she felt. It was alive in her, a voice that spoke when no one else was listening. School had been a challenge. The other children did not understand her. They teased her for her old clothes, for the small bag she carried, and for the way she always seemed to be somewhere else, lost in her own thoughts. She tried to explain music to them, but they only laughed. They did not see that she could hear things they could not. She did not let it stop her. She practiced in empty classrooms after school, or in the hallways where the janitor would kindly pretend not to notice. Her determination grew because she had no other choice. The piano was her escape, but it was also her hope. Her compositions began to take shape in a small notebook she kept hidden under her bed. She did not show them to anyone at first, fearing ridicule or rejection. But the notes and chords she wrote down were pieces of herself, fragments of her life, her feelings, and her dreams. There were songs that were sad and quiet, songs that were joyful and energetic, and some that mixed both, reflecting the confusion of growing up in a world that did not always make sense. Every melody she wrote carried a story, sometimes about her own struggles, sometimes about people she had never met, but always about emotions she had learned to feel deeply. Her mother noticed the change in her. She saw the way her daughter would light up when she touched the piano, the way she would hum a tune even when doing chores. One evening, she quietly said, "You have something inside you. Do not waste it." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. They became a kind of fuel for the young girl's passion. She practiced longer, stayed later, and dreamed bigger. She imagined stages, large halls, audiences, and applause. At first it seemed impossible, but the dream became real in her mind. It guided her fingers and strengthened her resolve. There were many nights of struggle. Sometimes she would sit in the dark, feeling tears running down her cheeks because a piece she had practiced for hours still did not sound right. Sometimes she felt hopeless, thinking she would never be able to play like the musicians she admired. But each time she returned to the piano, she learned to take mistakes as lessons, to turn frustration into motivation, and to understand that music was as much about feeling as it was about technique. She started to perform in small places, at local community events, at school gatherings, even in the subway when she needed a few coins. Each time she faced people who doubted her, people who whispered and laughed, people who did not care. But each time, she noticed something different: a pause in conversation, smile of recognition, a hand clapping, even if shyly. These small moments gave her courage. They reminded her that music could touch people in ways words could not. Over the years, she met teachers who taught her new techniques, showed her pieces she had never imagined, and encouraged her to try harder. Not all teachers were kind, and not all lessons were easy, but she learned to listen, to absorb, and to adapt. She combined everything she had learned with the instincts she had developed in those quiet years alone. Her style was unique, a blend of discipline and emotion, technique and heart. She learned that music was not only about playing the right notes, but about telling a story with every sound. Her compositions grew more ambitious. She wrote songs that told stories of joy and sorrow, of struggle and triumph, of quiet nights and noisy mornings. She began to imagine an audience, not for validation, but as a way to share what she felt. Every time she imagined someone listening and feeling what she felt, she played with more intensity, more clarity, and more emotion. By the time she was ready for the grand hall, she was no longer just a girl with an old piano in a small apartment. She was a musician who had learned from life itself. Every hardship, every moment of loneliness, every whisper of mockery she had faced in her childhood had shaped her fingers, her mind, and her heart. She had learned to transform pain into music, doubt into strength, and silence into expression. She carried all of this with her as she walked into the hall, her hands steady and her spirit ready. The journey from the broken piano to the grand stage had been long and lonely, but it had taught her more than she could have learned anywhere else. She understood that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, resilience, and the willingness to face failure were just as important. She had grown through every challenge, and now, every memory and every lesson flowed into the music she was about to share with the world. And so, as she prepared to play, she closed her eyes for a brief moment and remembered the old apartment, the broken piano, and the nights filled with practice and hope. She felt gratitude for the struggles, for the people who had doubted her, and for the music that had never left her side. All of it had led to this moment. She could feel the story of her life ready to be told through the keys, ready to reach hearts she had never met, ready to turn years of quiet struggle into a sound that would be unforgettable. She sat at the grand piano in the hall, her hands poised above the keys. The audience had quieted, though some still whispered among themselves, unsure what to expect. She could feel the weight of their gaze, heavy and skeptical, pressing down on her. For a moment, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered all the years that had led to this moment: the broken piano, the small apartment, the nights of practice, the tears, and the moments of quiet triumph. She let that memory fill her, not with fear, but with strength. Her fingers moved to the keys, lightly at first, testing the feel of the instrument beneath her hands. It was perfect, smooth and responsive, ready to carry her music across the room. The first note rang out, clear and soft, like a whisper meant for anyone willing to listen. Some in the audience looked puzzled, unsure if this was the right beginning. A few rolled their eyes, thinking it too simple, too timid. She did not let it bother her. The note was the beginning of a story, not the whole tale. She continued, each hand moving carefully, then more confidently. The melody she played was gentle at first, a reflection of her childhood and the quiet moments of struggle that had shaped her. As she played, she could feel the audience beginning to shift. The whispering voices faded, replaced by a sense of curiosity. People leaned forward slightly, ears attuned to the sound, hearts unconsciously following the rhythm. She could sense a few people in the front row, exchanging glances, some raising eyebrows, realizing that the music was more than they had expected. The story in her music grew. She added depth, minor notes that carried sorrow and longing, balanced with brighter notes that hinted at hope. Each phrase was carefully placed, a combination of technical skill and emotional honesty. She imagined herself back in her small apartment, practicing late at night, fingers aching from repetition, yet finding joy in each successful note. Those memories gave her courage, and she let the emotions flow freely into her hands. The audience was slowly being drawn in. Some could not contain their fascination. A man in the middle of the hall leaned forward, eyes wide, realizing that what he had dismissed at first was something extraordinary. A woman in the front row had tears forming in her eyes, the story of resilience and emotion in the music touching her deeply. Even those who had smirked earlier were now quiet. Caught by the unexpected beauty of the performance, she continued to play, letting her hands move faster, more fluidly. The tempo changed naturally, mirroring the emotions that she had felt throughout her life. There were moments of tension, where her fingers struck the keys with urgency, almost like shouting, conveying struggle and frustration. Then softer passages emerged, bringing a sense of calm and reflection, a quiet reminder that hope could exist even in the darkest times. The room itself seemed to respond. The chandeliers above reflected the light onto polished floors, and for a moment it felt as though the entire hall was vibrating with her music. The audience sat in a shared experience, connected through something beyond words. She felt their attention, but it did not intimidate her. Instead, it fueled her performance. She played not for validation, but to share a part of herself, and in doing so, she realized that her music could reach people in ways that conversation never could. There were moments when she stumbled slightly, a note missed, a chord imperfect. But instead of panic, she embraced the mistake, letting it become part of the story. She had learned long ago that perfection was less important than authenticity. Music was alive, and sometimes imperfection made it real. The audience, sensing her sincerity, was not distracted. They were captivated by her honesty and vulnerability. Drawn into the narrative she wove through the keys, her mind drifted briefly, remembering the nights when she had no one to listen, practicing alone, imagining an audience that did not exist. She remembered the teachers who had doubted her, the peers who had mocked her, and the people who had told her she would never make it. Each memory was a note in the symphony she was now performing. Every challenge she had faced added texture and depth to her playing. She felt a wave of gratitude and pride as she realized how far she had come. The music began to swell, growing richer and more complex. She blended melodies that spoke of joy and triumph with harmonies that reflected struggle and resilience. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving with confidence and fluidity. The audience was silent now, completely absorbed. The initial skepticism had vanished, replaced by awe and anticipation. People held their breath, waiting to see where the music would take them next. A young boy in the front row clutched his mother's hand, wide-eyed, mesmerized by the beauty of the sound. An older man in the back leaned slightly forward, nodding subtly, appreciating the skill and emotion that he had at first doubted. Each listener was experiencing the music in their own way, yet all were connected through the performance. She felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before, knowing that her story told through the piano was reaching hearts that had been closed or indifferent. She began the final section of her piece, the most emotional and powerful part. Her hands moved swiftly, yet with precision, creating a cascade of sound that filled the hall. She let herself feel every emotion she had ever known, translating them into the language of music. Pain, hope, fear, joy, all were expressed in the delicate and forceful notes she played. The audience could feel it too, a shared wave of emotion that enveloped the room as she neared the end. The music softened, each note lingering in the air like a gentle exhale. The intensity gave way to a tender resolution, a sense of peace and accomplishment. She allowed the final note to ring out fully, letting it fade naturally without rushing. For a long moment, the hall was completely silent. The audience sat frozen, as if in awe, absorbing the story that had been told without words. She could feel their admiration, respect, and even surprise. The mockery that had greeted her earlier was gone, replaced by acknowledgement of something real, beautiful, and profound. She lifted her hands from the keys and sat quietly, letting the echoes of the last notes linger. A soft murmur began, a ripple of appreciation moving through the hall. It grew steadily, building into applause, cheers, and exclamations of admiration. Some people were on their feet, clapping enthusiastically. Tears were visible on a few faces, proof that the music had touched them deeply. She allowed herself a small, humble smile, recognizing that she had achieved something remarkable. The applause continued, filling the room, and yet she felt calm. She had told her story, shared her emotions, and connected with people in a way she had never imagined. She had faced doubt and mockery, and through the language of music, she had transformed it into understanding and respect. This performance was more than just playing the piano. It was a declaration of resilience, a testament to the power of perseverance and passion. As the audience continued to applaud, she stood, curtsied lightly, and then stepped back. Her heart was still racing, but it was a happy, fulfilling kind of excitement. She had crossed a threshold tonight, not just in skill or recognition, but in the experience of sharing her inner world and finding it reflected in the hearts of others. She knew this moment would stay with her forever, a turning point in her journey. A proof that talent combined with determination could break barriers, silence doubt, and create something truly unforgettable. The final note hung in the air longer than any of the others. For a moment, the grand hall was suspended in silence, as if time itself had paused to listen. The audience remained still, caught between disbelief and awe. Some could not breathe for fear of breaking the spell. She sat there, hands lightly resting on the keys, feeling the echo of every note that had flowed through her fingers. There was no rush, no need for applause yet. The silence spoke louder than anything she could imagine. She glanced up at the audience, seeing faces transformed. Those who had once whispered, sneered, or rolled their eyes were now captivated. Their expressions had shifted from doubt to something deeper: respect, wonder, and maybe even humility. The people who had judged her based on her clothes, her bag, or her quiet demeanor now sat in quiet admiration. Unable to find words that could match what they had just experienced, a woman near the front had tears in her eyes. Her hand pressed gently to her chest. She had arrived expecting another performance, routine and polished, but what she heard was raw, honest, and alive. She could feel the struggle, the triumph, and the joy that the pianist had poured into every note. She looked at the young woman on stage and realized that she had just witnessed something extraordinary, something far beyond talent alone. A man in the back leaned forward, gripping the edge of his chair. His eyebrows were raised in surprise, his lips parted slightly as he processed the depth of the music. He had thought it would be simple, perhaps even amusing, but now he was forced to reconsider every judgment he had made. He felt a quiet shame at his initial mockery, but also admiration for the courage it had taken to perform, despite the sneers and doubt. He could see clearly that this was more than a performance, it was a statement, a declaration of perseverance and strength. The audience remained still, almost reverent. The echo of the last note lingered, touching the walls, the ceiling, and every soul in the room. Some were breathing heavily, as if the music had physically moved them. Some sat frozen, trying to absorb what they had just witnessed. The weight of her story, told without words, but entirely present in sound, had taken hold. She allowed herself a moment to take it in, feeling both relief and quiet triumph. The years of struggle, the nights of solitude and practice, the countless moments of doubt and frustration had all led to this instant. And yet, she felt humility. She knew that the music belonged not to her alone, but to everyone who had heard it, who had felt it, and who had let it touch something deep within them. A soft rustle broke the silence. One hand clapped, timidly at first, hesitant to disturb the spell. Then another followed. Slowly, a wave of applause began to spread through the hall, gentle and careful, as if testing the waters. She could see the realization in people's eyes. They were acknowledging that what they had just heard was special, rare and unforgettable. The applause grew, spreading to louder claps. Some standing, some cheering quietly, moved in a way they had not expected. She allowed herself a small smile, grateful not for the sound of the applause itself, but for the connection that had been made. She had spoken through music, bypassing doubt and judgment, and reached the hearts of those who had once dismissed her. That connection, fragile yet powerful, was the true reward. The audience's reaction was a reflection of that bond, a mirror showing her that perseverance, passion, and honesty could move people in ways no words could. She stood slowly, curtsying slightly, acknowledging the audience without arrogance. Her legs felt weak, but steady. Every clap and cheer seemed to lift her, filling her with warmth and a quiet sense of achievement. She realized in that moment that her journey had been about more than skill or talented, had been about courage, resilience, and the refusal to be silenced by doubt or mockery. Some people approached her after the performance, eyes shining with admiration. They spoke softly, praising the emotion and beauty of her music, asking how she had learned to convey so much through her playing. She listened, nodding humbly, aware that words could not fully explain the journey that had led to this moment. The questions and compliments mattered, but they were secondary to the unspoken communication that had just taken place through the piano. A young girl, no more than 10, approached her quietly, clutching a small notebook of sketches and notes. She hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "I want to play like you someday." The pianist knelt down, meeting the child's eyes, and smiled. "You can," she said simply. "Keep practicing, keep listening, and never give up. Music is yours to tell your story." The child's eyes sparkled, and she ran back to her seat, inspired. It was in moments like this that the pianist felt the true impact of her journey, the way it could inspire others to dream, to persevere, and to find their own voice. The hall slowly emptied. Leaving her alone for a moment on the stage, she ran her hands lightly over the keys, feeling the echoes of the music one last time. Every note carried a memory, every chord a fragment of her story. She remembered the broken piano in her childhood apartment, the nights spent practicing alone, the moments of doubt and mockery. All of it had led to this acknowledgement not just of her talent, but of her persistence, her heart, and her unwavering belief in herself. As she left the stage, she felt a quiet pride. The experience had been transformative, not only for the audience, but for herself. She had turned mockery into recognition, doubt into respect, and silence into connection. The memory of the audience's faces, their reactions, and the lingering echoes of the music would stay with her forever. She knew that this was a milestone, not the end. A proof that the courage to continue, the dedication to craft, and the willingness to share oneself openly could lead to moments of true magic. The journey ahead would still be long, with challenges and obstacles waiting, but she felt ready. The hall had been her proving ground. The audience, a reflection of the impact music could have when played with honesty and heart. She understood now that greatness was not about avoiding failure or ridicule, but about embracing the struggle and using it to create something meaningful. Every whisper of mockery she had heard in the past had prepared her for this moment, and she had transformed it into a story of triumph. She left the hall with a sense of calm fulfillment. The night sky greeted her outside, cold and clear, but she felt warmth in her chest. The world had witnessed her story, and in return, she had received something equally precious, a recognition of her resilience, her passion, and the depth of her music. She walked home slowly, savoring the quiet victory, knowing that this experience would shape her forever. The music had spoken, the audience had listened. The once mocked pianist had begun to leave her mark on the world. The days after the performance were unlike anything she had ever experienced. The story of the young pianist who had silenced a hall full of skeptics spread quickly, carried by word of mouth, local newspapers, and small social gatherings. People who had once doubted her were now talking about her with awe. She received invitations to perform at other venues, requests from teachers who wanted to work with her, and letters from young musicians who had been inspired by her courage and talent. It was overwhelming, yet she welcomed it, knowing that all this attention was a reflection of years of persistence and love for music. She spent the next weeks reflecting on the journey that had led her here. She thought about the small apartment, the broken piano, the nights spent practicing alone, and the constant pressure of doubt and mockery. Every memory seemed to come alive in her mind, now transformed by the success of her performance. She realized that each challenge she had faced had prepared her for this moment, shaping not just her skill, but her character, her patience, and her ability to communicate deeply through music. Though she had gained recognition, she did not become proud or arrogant. She remained humble, understanding that the music itself was what mattered most. The applause and the attention were fleeting, but the connection she had created with her audience was lasting. She wanted to continue sharing that gift, to inspire others, and to show that passion and perseverance could overcome even the harshest judgment. One morning, a letter arrived from a small school in the city. The principal wrote that they had heard about her performance and asked if she would be willing to visit and play for the students. She agreed immediately, seeing this as an opportunity to share her story with young minds, to inspire them to dream and work hard, and to show them that talent could be nurtured even in the simplest surroundings. When she arrived at the school, the children gathered eagerly around her. Some were shy, some curious, and some skeptical, just as the audience in the grand hall had been. She smiled gently at them and began to play. At first the notes were soft, cautious, testing the waters, but soon the music took on life, filling the classroom, flowing over the children, capturing their attention. Faces lit up with surprise and delight. Some whispered to each other, eyes wide with wonder. She saw a spark in their eyes, the same spark she had once felt when she first touched a piano. She realized then that music had the power to ignite imagination and courage. And she felt a profound sense of purpose. After the performance, many children came forward shyly asking questions about how she learned to play, how she practiced, and what inspired her. She answered with honesty, telling them that talent alone was not enough, that persistence, patience, and belief in oneself were just as important. She shared stories of her small apartment, the broken piano, and the long nights of practice. The children listened, captivated by her story, and she could see the influence it had on them, planting seeds of hope and determination. Meanwhile, invitations from music schools, concert halls, and even international venues began to arrive. She was offered opportunities to perform for people she had never imagined meeting, to collaborate with musicians she had admired from afar. Every invitation was an acknowledgement of her talent and her hard work. Yet she approached each new opportunity with care, choosing those that aligned with her vision and values. Ensuring that her music remained true to her heart, she also began composing new pieces. Inspired by the experiences and emotions that surrounded her after the performance, she wrote melodies that celebrated triumph over doubt, harmonies that reflected the joy of connection, and chords that told stories of resilience and hope. Her compositions were no longer just personal expressions. They became messages to the world, reminders that perseverance and passion could create beauty in the face of adversity. Through all of this, she never forgot the moments of struggle that had defined her early years. She continued to practice daily, refining her technique and exploring new styles, always learning, always growing. She knew that her journey was far from over, and that every performance, every composition, and every interaction with an audience was a chance to deepen her understanding of music and of herself. As the months passed, she became a symbol of hope and inspiration. People admired not only her skill, but her humility, her dedication, and her ability to connect with others through music. Young musicians sought her guidance, parents encouraged their children to follow her example, and audiences eagerly awaited her performances. She had transformed her own life, and in the process, touched the lives of countless others. One evening, she returned to the grand hall where it had all begun. The chandeliers gleamed, the velvet curtains framed the stage, and the piano stood ready. She approached it with reverence, remembering the first time she had played there, the nervousness, the doubts, and the whispers of mockery. She sat down, fingers hovering above the keys, and took a deep breath. This time, there was no fear, no hesitation. The years of practice, the struggles, and the triumphs had brought her to this moment. She played, and the music flowed effortlessly, carrying not just her story, but the stories of everyone who had been part of her journey. The audience listened, enraptured as she poured emotion, skill, and heart into every note. She could see faces reflecting awe, joy, and wonder, just as they had the first time. But this time, she felt a deeper connection, a recognition that her music had grown, that her journey had matured, and that she was part of something larger than herself. She was not only a performer, she was a storyteller, a guide, and a source of inspiration. When the final note faded, the hall erupted in applause, louder and more heartfelt than before. People stood, cheering, clapping, and even weeping quietly, moved by the depth of the performance. She smiled, not for herself, but for the music, for the journey, and for the connection she had created. She had taken mockery and doubt, transformed them into art, shared that gift with the world. As she left the stage that night, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. She knew that her path would continue to have challenges, but she also knew that she had the courage, skill, and heart to face them. Her life had been changed forever, not by fame or recognition alone, but by the power of perseverance, the strength of passion, and the courage to share her story. She had turned a simple piano performance into a masterpiece. And in doing so, she had inspired countless others to believe in themselves, to follow their dreams, to find their own voices in a world that often doubts the power of one person to make a difference. Her story became a legend, not for the applause or the recognition, but for the example it set. It reminded people everywhere that talent can be hidden in unexpected places, that perseverance can overcome doubt, and that the human spirit, when combined with passion and dedication, can achieve extraordinary things. She continued to play, to teach, and to compose, carrying forward the message that had been at the heart of her journey, that even in the face of mockery, fear, and uncertainty, greatness can emerge. And one person's dedication can leave a lasting impact on the world.